there is sexism happening.
There's that tendency, that gender tendency to go with men.
None of these jobs could not be done by women.
Men are stronger, so they might be better grips.
That is
No,
the definition
you're
of
not
sexism.
letting me. In this little segment, we're going to be looking at gender breakdowns in the industry. And it's no joke. I mean, there's much, much stronger representation of men in some positions than women. And in some cases, women dominate. So let's see how that breaks down, Shawn. There's more producers who are women. Women cover production design pretty effectively. More women now in documentary, almost 50%, and 50% men, 50% women. Women are very strong in editing and actually making more inroads, and women dominate casting. On the other side, men directors, 97%. That's in Hollywood blockbusters. Director of photography, again, 97% men. ADs men, grips men, effects men, executive producers, always men, very few women in that. So I think it's just gender tendencies. I don't really think that there's a gender bias.
The fact that some of these positions are so strongly represented, that 97% of directors are men, clearly shows that there is sexism happening. In
Okay,
fact,
what's your definition of sexism? Because I don't agree with this at all.
I think the fact that candidates or people are getting jobs based on their gender in some ways more than they are based on their skill set.
Okay, because let me break this down from my perspective. Yeah, there's Neanderthal men out there, but when it comes down to grip, men have muscles that women don't. That doesn't mean that all grip positions are men positions, but there's that tendency, that gender tendency to go with men.
See, but I disagree that grips are not generally moving 500 pounds. It's not world's strongest man competition. That none of these jobs could not be done by women. I have to be honest, I'm even hesitant to talk about these numbers in the fact that I feel like when we sit there and say 97% of directors are men, 97% of ADs are men, 97% of grips are men, I don't want the message going out that, well, women shouldn't be going after these jobs. But
I'm not saying that.
Really uncomfortable.
I'm not saying
I know
that.
you're not, but
Yeah.
it's the fact that we use these numbers, I believe that that's how they're taken. That
Well,
how many women are sitting there saying, I really want to be a director, but I can't fight my way through this.
But-
Maybe I'll go into editing
But
instead.
isn't that the hallmark of who we are? If we have the strength, if we have the internal push, if you will, to go forward and get a position, even if people are telling us no. I mean, that's the truth about if you write a film, if you are trying to get people to support you in any way, you've got to have the strength to move through negativity.
I agree with that, but by the same token is, life isn't fair, so I'm hesitant to always say that it's not fair, but it isn't fair that if you're a male, if you're white, if you're middle class, you have the whole thing open, whereas women have to do all of the same issues that men do and have to deal with this gender bias at the same way. And I feel like we're ending up discouraging people from going after these jobs.
Okay.
There is a lot more support out there for women. We see women find, the first woman won an Academy Award for Best Directing recently. The women in film groups are doing it. It's becoming a focus.
So you're not thinking that we need to do anything legislatively or actually take any kind of action, that we just have to have women continue to make the inroads that they're making?
Yes and no. At this point, I don't think legislative action would help. I don't think there is anything we can do. I do think it's a focus of how we train our students and the people who are working. That I have an expectation in my edit room that if I see anybody on the production, doing anything sexist, downgrading women, races, any of that.
But I agree with that.
I go after them,
Okay.
and to the point that it's there. In other words, I work to be an ally. And I think a lot of our students go out in the real world or the professional world and they see this behavior and they don't confront it. And I feel like we have to.
And I agree with that. But at the same time, when I send students to Hollywood, and I send a lot to Hollywood, so do you, I tell them Hollywood is beautiful or magical, ugly. The ugly side of it, I mean, if you're not going onto a set expecting to see drugs on a set, you're kidding yourself. There's going to be some drugs on a set.
Okay.
And if you go there and you go, there's drugs on the set, I'm going to call the police, well, then you probably won't work for a long time.
But there's a huge difference between drugs on a set and sexism. In fact, if you sit there and there are drugs on the set and you don't want any, everybody's happy because it means more for everyone
Okay,
else.
so let me ask this question. You get onto your set, you're a woman, somebody comes up to you and they're sexist. They're just, and I'm not going to give an example of how that could be. There's so many ways. They're do you confront them?
Yes. That's the other argument that we get to is this argument of women not being as well represented quickly becomes an argument of, well, that's just the way sets are. That you're going to face sexism, and you know what? If you want to make it in this industry, it's just something you got to deal with. That is wrong. That is completely and totally wrong. Nobody needs to deal with this sexism. You shouldn't have to choose between being degraded, being treated like crap, and getting the job you want. You are protected in this industry to go after that. You don't have to put up with that. You shouldn't have to put up with it. I think there is sort of an old boys club going on.
Oh,
in some
absolutely.
Of these
That's why it's
the Teamster who's been there for 30 years is like, oh, it's just the way it is. It's not. And the people who are working, the people who are creative, will not put up with that. So I think, no, it's not.
And I got to tell you that one of the reasons that we developed the boot camp here, the militaristic way to do things, is to make people tougher. Now, I came from a university that one of the professors, female professor, would take the girls and put them into jail for the first weekend of their college experience. And the women came back and they were changed in a very negative way. They were men haters. Many of them were men haters. And what she was trying to do was toughen them up. I don't want to go that far, but at the same time, I want to toughen our students up for the realities of what they're going to find in the industry. And yes, when they get onto the set, there's actually ways you can complain about somebody who's coming up to you and maybe propositioning you and maybe trying to force you into a situation or is very biased towards you sexually. But should you actually follow through with those complaints and try to work it up through the ladder?
Absolutely.
I don't know that you should.
You absolutely should. In some ways, the discussion we're at now is useless for our series about the film industry. This, in terms of sexual harassment, yeah, absolutely. In terms of sexual harassment, it should be treated in the film industry the same way it'd be treated in an office, the same way it'd be treated if you're working in the mall, the same way it'd be treated if you're working at McDonald's. It's the same thing. The fact that we are in a creative industry doesn't mean you should be accepting this behavior, doesn't mean you should not be confronting this behavior. We are a professional industry. That is honestly, I think, one of the biggest changes that happens from the 50s and 60s.
Okay,
to today
I'm going to say.
We are now a much more professional industry. We are much more regulated. We have our OSHA grants. We're looked over. The unions protect us, where in the past I think it was an old boys club, but it's not anymore.
But it is changing. Okay, and it changes no matter what you do. Okay,
it changes because of what you do.
I disagree.
That if women who are facing harassment are not calling it out, if the people on the set, when they see it, are not saying, hey, this wasn't towards me, but this is complete
But what
bullshit,
we disagree with...
It will not change.
What we disagree with is how far you go to complain. I think that if a producer is saying, jump on the casting couch, you say no, and you leave. You don't go and complain to the executive producer.
You have to. You absolutely do, because he may go through 5, 6, 7, 8 people who say no, but that 9th or 10th person who does and gets the job destroys the industry.
You're assuming that old boys club still isn't intact and strong, and I think it is. And I think if you try to start poking at it, I think what you're going to do is blackball yourself.
I don't believe the industry has a blackball for sexual harassment, and I don't believe it ever will. I would go so far as a lot of the productions I've worked on, if we had heard that someone was blackballed because they called out sexual harassment, I would go out of my way to hire them because that means something. I don't think it is that way, but I think that perception is what allows this harassment to continue. The fact that somebody pulls the people aside and goes, if you report this, you may never work again, and it just all goes on the table. And it only will end if people confront it. And we're at a point where it is changing. We are ending it. But we follow this idea, if we don't report it, we don't confront it, we're going to be back where we were 20 years ago.
Okay. I'd like to actually, in another segment, the one that follows, really break down some of these positions a little more effectively and as to why the directors and the director of photography, what's going on that 97% of the directors are men and 97% of the DPs are men. I mean, there's some reasons there, and I think I'd like to just touch upon that briefly.
Okay.